I don't know what it is about the small little hi-fi manufacturer that appeals to me so much. Perhaps it's some kind of slightly romanticised notion that it's a million miles away from the corporate world. You know, the kind of place where if decisions aren't led by the accounting and marketing departments, they're certainly heavily informed by them. The idea of an engineer tinkering and toiling in a workshop and eventually coming up with a circuit design or a speaker design that they believe in so strongly that they think, do you know what? I might build this and try and sell it. That's what I find so charming. It evokes memories of the days when high-end audio was nothing much more than a cottage industry. And believe it or not, somehow those brands still exist today. You might have to go searching for them, but they're still out there. James Edward Sugden may no longer be alive to build the classic range of amplifiers that bear his name, but Tony Miller and his small team have been designing and handcrafting Sugden amplifiers for over 40 years at their small facility in Yorkshire, England. And it's a similar case with Exposure Electronics that changed hands from John Farlow to Tony Brady over 2 decades ago. Okay, so the main PCB board might be hand propagated in Malaysia, but everything else is designed, built and assembled here in the UK. Glenn Croft can usually be found in his workshop as well, hand building the amplifiers that have borne his name for the last 4 decades. It truly is amazing that these brands can still exist. Yes, they don't have the big buying power of the corporates, but they don't have the big marketing spends and the large overheads either. And it's one of these outfits that I'm looking at today. David Bellis has been designing amplifiers for other companies as well as his own for over 30 years. The Belles Aria Integrated is the entry level in the range. It retails here in the UK for £2,500. And yes, even this model is hand built in the USA, down to each component being put on the PCB board. How often do you get to say that? So when one of my patrons got in touch and said, Taran, you might want to check this brand out, I simply couldn't resist. There's no fancy casework here, but the Belles Aria has a thick brushed aluminium front panel, and it's reassuringly heavy for a full rack width unit of this size, weighing in at 12 kilograms or 26.5 pounds. Going from left to right, there's a button to toggle between 3 line level inputs and the moving magnet phono stage, a button to engage the monitor loop if you want to connect recording devices, or select bypass mode for easy integration with home theatre receivers. There's also a button to mute the device, as well as take the unit in and out of standby. The volume control has a nice feel to it. It's weighty and has a smooth operation when rotating. There's also a 6.25mm 1/4-inch headphone jack. The supplied remote control might be plastic, inexpensive and simple, but it's functional and gets the job done. To the rear you'll see a bank of RCA connections that are heavier duty than I typically tend to find on amplifiers around this price. There's a phono input with a ground connection, 3 line level RCA connections, monitor out and monitor in for the monitor loop, home theatre bypass input, and pre-outs to connect to powered subwoofers or an external power amplifier. The left and right speaker terminals are what I would deem to be more of a typical standard of construction, but they're still of respectable quality. We're inside the Belles Aria, and the reason why this amplifier is so heavy for an amplifier that's conservatively rated at 75 watts into 8 ohms, 120 watts into 4 ohms, is primarily because of this toroidal transformer. That's a 500 VA toroid, which is about double the size that you'd ordinarily expect to see on an amplifier with this kind of power rating. And the reason it's so big is because this amplifier can deliver current, has a peak capability of 18 amps, and that's double what you get from something like an Audiolab 6000A. This is the power supply section, and what you see is 4 of those filter caps from CDE, that's Cornell Dubliner, and they're pretty well regarded, perhaps not quite as much as Elner or Nishikon, but not far off. Each one of those caps is rated at 22,000 microfarads, so that's 44,000 microfarads per channel, and that's fairly decent. You also have one of these small little toroids, and I presume that's there for when this unit is in standby, so it consumes very little power. There are a lot of these black ICs that you can see, those rectangles, and I think they're for system control. logic gates, things like that. This is the preamplifier and headphone amplifier board, and what you have is an Alps volume control. There are a few resistors and capacitors, but I can't see any transistors, so I'm wondering if this is a passive preamplifier section. What you can see are these two ICs here, which are Burr Brown OPA 551 op amps, and they deal with the headphone amplification. Adjacent to that is the power amplifier board, and mounted to this heatsink are 8 of these Epicon ECX 10P20 MOSFET transistors. Now, MOSFET transistors typically tend to have a warmer sound than bipolar junction transistors. The other thing to note on this board is that it's fully discrete through-hole components, no ICs, no surface mount components, and many people believe that that leads to better audio quality. Finally, the input board, and all these white relays that you can see, they're used to switch between one input and the other. They're by Axicon Texas Instruments. And the decoupling capacitors, there's 2 of them here, by Dayton Audio, and they're from the audio grade range. They're the same ones that are used throughout this device. And the job of a decoupling capacitor is basically to remove the DC current from one stage to another, because you want the signal amplified, not the DC current. What's interesting about the Belles Aria sound is that it's the type of sound that isn't trying to be all things to all people. It's clear that David Belles has gone for the type of sound that will appeal to many traditional types of audiophiles. Now, I'm going to break things down, but I'm going to focus on 2 comparisons that are my benchmark for amplifiers around £2,000. Those of you who regularly follow this channel pretty much guess what those are, but if you don't, I'd like you to know this. I've heard an awful lot of amplifiers around this price, and these 2 particular amplifiers stand out. The Exposure 2510 currently retails for £1,750 in the UK. It has superb clarity and control, a beautifully natural mid-range with just a smidgen of romanticism, and throws out a wide and deep soundstage. Once you upgrade the Wilsington R8 to the PS Vane TI2 collection tubes, you have a tube amplifier that competes very favourably with the Exposure 2510, not just in terms of price but sonically as well. I feel these benchmarks are important to establish because hopefully they help to lay out the foundation of where I'm coming from. Now, the reason why I can't personally choose between the Exposure 2510 and the uprated Wilsington R8 is because when switching between those 2 amplifiers, you give up something to gain something. The R8 has a more full-bodied sound, more richness of tone, and it also has a little bit more dynamic impact, primarily because of added bass weight. But it also gives up some definition in the bass and overall a little bit of refinement as well. Which of those 2 amplifiers you'd prefer, I feel, comes down to personal taste and system matching. And in a lot of ways, that's the case with the Belles Aria as well. It delivers a sonic presentation that has even more acoustic mass than the Wilsington R8. In fact, tonally, I'd say it's more akin to its Class A big brother. It has greater muscularity and musical authority than the R8 as well, and that's primarily due to the added bass heft. The Belles Aria gives up nothing when it comes to the way it throws out sound compared to my 2 benchmarks either. The soundstage width, soundstage depth, and the placement of instruments within the landscape are all excellent and right up there with the class leaders. But you're not going to get your cake and eat it. What it does give up is some definition and control in the low frequencies and some clarity in the mid-range and high frequencies compared to the Wilsington and the Exposure. Bass has all the weight that you could wish for, but there's a little bit of bloom there as well. It certainly isn't one-note bass, but it isn't the last word in definition for amplifiers around this price. That little bit of cloudiness in the lower frequencies also manifests itself in the lower mid-range, where it masquerades as warmth, obscuring some fine details at the same time. Leading edges of notes are a little softened. The body and the decay of notes is very nice though. In the vocal region, whether it's male or female vocals, the vocal presence and the vocal clarity is very good, right up there with the best. It's the way in which the Belles Aria delivers its higher octaves which is going to determine whether you think this amplifier's smooth and organic or playing things just a little bit too safe. The upper mid-range, those are the frequencies that you associate with a little bit of bite and excitement, and I can understand why they pull things back a little bit here. It has the kind of presentation that's forgiving of bright recordings and that you can listen for long periods without any listening fatigue. It's well judged in my opinion because it doesn't sound dull and boring in the process. But in the high frequencies, that's where I wonder whether they're just taking things just a bit too far. Yes, it has the presentation that's forgiving of bright partnering equipment as well as bright recording. I'll come to that next. But it also, with the best recordings, robs it of ultimate air and transparency, that ethereal quality on top. I did miss that. The Belles Aria is a traditional Class AB amplifier. As far as I'm aware, there are no options to fit a DAC board inside. So if you want to keep the box count to a minimum, this isn't going to be your choice. But if you want an off-board DAC, given the fact that those operate in very competitive areas of the market, so you can get very good ones for a sensible price, all the money here has gone into the amplifier section, and perhaps that might be the reason why you choose this. But I want to talk about another aspect of its sound quality that I haven't spoken about as yet, and that is its ability to play at low volumes. Now I have a bunch of amplifiers that play well at low volumes. The Exposure 2510 plays at low volumes very well, so does the Wilsington R8, and my Exposure 21 Pre and 18 Super monoblocks. Part of the reason why I've had them for 20 odd years is that late at night when I'm listening in the 50-60 dB range, they play very well. The Belles Aria is better than all of them in this particular regard. It just sounds fuller when the others can sound a little bit thin. It's an exceptional quality of this amplifier. Can you think of another amplifier that has a warm, rich sound that plays exceptionally well at low volumes? I can, a Sugden. But this isn't Class A, this is Class AB, so you don't have to worry about it warming up your room. When it comes to partner equipment, I think this amplifier is best suited to neutral speakers and those that have a slightly tilted top end. I didn't have any bright speakers to hand, but my favourite combination was the JBL 4309s. They're not a bright speaker, but they have a little bit of liveliness that combine very well with this Belles amp. The Amphion Argon ones, again, not a bright speaker, but they do have a slight smile presentation by virtue of a little bit of thinness in the mid-range. They combine very well with the Belles Aria to provide a nicely balanced sound. The Dali Minu SEs are a smaller, less dynamic speaker, but more revealing in the mid-range than the previous two, and more of the coloration of the amplifier came through. But if that's what you're looking for, especially in the near field, that's a good match. My Product Response 1 SEs are the most difficult speakers to drive that I tried with the Aria, and it had no problem at all. Yes, there were some limitations in transparency and the coloration of the amplifier came through, but it wasn't a bad combination. I'd love to have tried them with something that was a little bit more lively on top, a B&W Focal, perhaps a Klipsch. I think they'll probably combine quite well, but obviously I can only talk about what I had to hand. It's heartwarming to know that little manufacturers can still produce highly competitive products in this day and age of globalization and corporations running the world. The Belles Aria produces a big, dynamic, warm, rich sound that's not only capable of driving most speakers in average sized living spaces, but plays exceptionally well at low listening levels as well. It's not for those of you looking for the last word in transparency, neutrality and a detail-centric sound, but those of you who like the idea of a traditional tube amplifier, but can't live with tubes, like the idea of a big, warm sounding Class A amplifier, but can't live with the fact that it's going to heat up your room. If that's you, the Belles Aria might be just what you're looking for, and for those of you, it comes highly recommended from this channel. My question for today is, what are your experience of small hi-fi companies, either products that you've tried or that you'd like to try? I'd love to hear about that in the comments section. All that remains for me to say is, if you haven't done so already, you like what I'm doing and you want to see this channel grow, please do all that social media stuff. Check me out on Patreon for consultancy services, bonus content. Join the ABA Club where we have video calls periodically. But for today, for now, British Audiophile, signing off.